March 9th, 2026, 5:47 a.m. A dense forest belt southwest of Sudzha, Kursk Oblast, 200 Russian naval infantrymen, 6 BMP-3 infantry fighting vehicles, 2 T-80 BVM main battle tanks, 1 forest road, no way out. 22 minutes later, 130 of them would never leave that forest. Pre-registered mortar coordinates, 40 anti-personnel mines buried along every logical dismount point, 25 FPV kamikaze drones armed and staged 800 meters east, Stugna-P anti-tank guided missile teams positioned at both ends of a 1.2-kilometer engagement zone. This was not a battle. This was a sentence, written 14 hours before the first Russian boot touched that road. I'm your host at UkraineSignal, where we analyze the battles that change wars. And today, we are breaking down one of the most precisely executed defensive ambushes of the entire Kursk salient campaign, a textbook kill zone that Ukrainian General Staff would later cite as a model for adapted ambush doctrine in woodland terrain. Because when Russia's 810th Naval Infantry Brigade was ordered to push through those forest corridors and encircle a Ukrainian strongpoint, someone at Russian command believed the trees would provide concealment. They believed speed and mass would overwhelm a defensive position. They were catastrophically wrong. Let's go back to the beginning. To understand why 200 Russian soldiers walked into an ambush they never saw coming, you have to understand the tactical geometry of the Kursk salient in early March 2026. Since Ukraine's cross-border incursion into Kursk Oblast in August 2024, the salient had become one of the most contested pieces of terrain in the entire war. Ukrainian forces held a network of strong points along key road junctions and elevated positions southwest of Sudzha. These positions disrupted Russian logistics, forced rerouting of supply convoys, and created a persistent threat to Russian rear areas. For months, Russian command had tried to reduce the salient through frontal assaults, mechanized pushes along roads, infantry waves through open fields. Each attempt bled against Ukrainian defenses that combined minefields, drone surveillance, and precision artillery. The losses were staggering, but Russian operational planning did not adapt. By late February 2026, a new plan emerged from the Russian side. Instead of pushing along predictable avenues of approach, the 810th Naval Infantry Brigade, an elite formation by Russian standards, drawn from the Black Sea Fleet's ground combat element, would conduct a flanking maneuver through dense woodland southwest of Sudzha. The objective was to navigate forest corridors that satellite imagery showed were lightly defended, emerge behind a Ukrainian strongpoint designated in Russian planning documents as Objective Birch, and encircle it from the rear. On paper, it was a reasonable concept. Forest terrain would mask the movement from Ukrainian drone surveillance. The density of the canopy would limit the effectiveness of FPV drones. And a reinforced battalion of 200 men with armored support could, in theory, overwhelm a strongpoint garrison. On paper, the problem was that UkraineSignal's intelligence was listening to every word. 14 hours before the Russian advance began, a SIGINT team attached to Ukraine's 3rd Assault Brigade intercepted the movement order. The intercept was detailed. It contained the axis of advance, the timeline, the force composition, and the objective. Russian communication security had failed at the most critical moment. The intercept reached the 3rd Assault Brigade's Tactical Operations Center at approximately 3:30 p.m. on March 8th. Within 90 minutes, the brigade commander had approved an ambush plan. The 3rd Assault Brigade is not an ordinary Ukrainian formation. Formed from the Azov Regiment, it carries the legacy of Mariupol, of months of urban combat against overwhelming odds. Its soldiers are among the most experienced and motivated in the Ukrainian armed forces. They do not simply defend positions, they create kill zones. And that is exactly what they did. The ambush planning was methodical. Intelligence officers overlaid the intercepted Russian route onto detailed terrain maps. The forest road the Russians intended to use ran roughly northeast to southwest through a belt of mixed pine and birch woodland. The canopy was thick but not impenetrable. More importantly, the road itself was narrow, flanked on both sides by dense undergrowth and uneven terrain that would channel any dismounting infantry into predictable paths. The 3rd Assault Brigade identified a 1.2-kilometer stretch of this road as the optimal engagement zone. The selection was precise. At the northeastern end, the road curved slightly, creating a natural choke point where a lead vehicle strike would block the entire column. At the southwestern end, a shallow depression crossed the road, another natural stopping point where a rear vehicle strike would complete the box. Which weapon system was deadlier in this ambush? The ATGMs, the artillery, or the drones? Drop your answer in the comments below. Between these two endpoints, the terrain funneled perfectly. Any infantry attempting to dismount and seek cover would move toward the tree line on either side of the road, and that is exactly where the mines went. Over the next 8 hours, sappers from the 3rd Assault Brigade's engineering platoon placed more than 40 anti-personnel mines along both sides of the road within the engagement zone. The mines were positioned at the most likely dismount points, areas where the shoulder of the road met the undergrowth, where fallen trees created natural cover positions, where small depressions in the terrain would instinctively attract soldiers seeking protection from fire. Simultaneously, mortar teams established firing positions at pre-surveyed coordinates. Every 50 meters of the road had been plotted. Fire missions were pre-calculated. When the moment came, the mortar crews would not need to adjust. They would simply fire at numbered reference points. 2 Stugna-P anti-tank guided missile teams were positioned with clear lines of sight to the northeastern and southwestern choke points. The Stugna-P is a Ukrainian-designed ATGM with a maximum effective range of 5 kilometers against armored targets. Its tandem charge heat warhead can penetrate up to 800 millimeters of rolled homogeneous armor after reactive armor, more than enough to defeat the frontal arc of a BMP-3, which carries only aluminum alloy hull armor rated to stop 30mm rounds at best. For the T-80B VMS, the Stugna-P operators knew they would need flank or rear shots. The T-80B VM's relict explosive reactive armor provides significant protection against tandem warheads when engaged frontally. But from the side or rear, the story changes entirely. A Stugna-P striking the engine compartment or the thinner side hull could achieve a catastrophic kill. The final element was the FPV drone teams. 25 kamikaze drones were prepared at a concealed staging area approximately 800 meters east of the engagement zone, in a small clearing masked by the forest canopy. Each drone carried a modified RPG warhead, a configuration that had become standard across Ukrainian assault brigades by late 2025. At a unit cost of roughly $500 per drone, these were among the most cost-effective anti-personnel and anti-armor weapons on the modern battlefield. The drone operators were veterans. Some had hundreds of confirmed strikes. In the lexicon of this war, they were aces, modern-day sharpshooters who could thread a drone through a vehicle hatch at 400 meters. By 2 a.m. on March 9th, the ambush was set. Fire teams were in position along the entire 1.2-kilometer stretch. Stugna-P teams had confirmed their sight lines. Mortar coordinates were locked. Mines were armed. Drones were charged and staged. The 3rd Assault Brigade's Tactical Operations Center confirmed readiness at 2:14 a.m. Now, they waited. Stay with me. Because what happens in the next 22 minutes would destroy an entire reinforced Company Plus formation and leave a trail of burning armor stretching over a kilometer through the Russian forest. The Russian column departed its assembly area at approximately 4:15 a.m. Ukrainian drone surveillance, a long-range reconnaissance UAV orbiting at altitude, detected the movement almost immediately. The column was organized in a standard Soviet doctrine road march formation. A lead BMP-3 served as the point vehicle, followed by the 2 T-80B VM tanks, then 4 more BMP-3s carrying the bulk of the infantry, with a final BMP-3 as the tail vehicle. 200 men. 8 armored vehicles, moving at approximately 15 kilometers per hour through the forest darkness. Russian command believed the forest canopy would shield the column from Ukrainian surveillance. In open terrain, a column of this size would be visible on thermal imaging from kilometers away. But the dense pine canopy overhead absorbed heat signatures and blocked direct observation from high-altitude drones. What Russian command did not account for was that Ukraine did not need thermal imaging. They already knew the exact route. They had known for 14 hours. The column moved steadily through the darkness. Russian infantry sat inside the BMPs, cramped in the troop compartments. The T-80 BVM crews monitored their thermal sights, scanning the tree line for movement. There was none. The forest was still. At 5:22 a.m., the lead BMP-3 crossed an invisible line. the northeastern boundary of the engagement zone. It passed the first pre-registered mortar coordinate without incident, then the second, then the third. The Ukrainian fire teams held their positions. Discipline was absolute. The ambush would not trigger until the entire column was inside the kill zone. Premature engagement would allow the rear vehicles to reverse and escape. Patience, stillness, the hardest part of any ambush. At 5:38 a.m., the tail BMP-3 passed the southwestern choke point. The entire column, all 8 vehicles, all 200 men, was now inside the 1.2-kilometer engagement zone. The 3rd Assault Brigade's ambush commander transmitted a single word on the tactical radio net. The first Stugna-P fired at 5:39 a.m. The missile covered the distance to the lead BMP-3 in under 4 seconds. The tandem charge warhead struck the vehicle's left side, just behind the turret ring. The detonation was catastrophic. The shaped charge jet penetrated the aluminum hull as though it were paper, igniting ammunition stored inside the turret bustle. A secondary explosion blew the turret completely off the hull. The BMP-3 lurched to a stop, engulfed in flames, blocking the narrow forest road. 3 seconds later, the 2nd Stugna-P team engaged the tail BMP-3. The missile struck the rear vehicle's engine compartment. Diesel fuel ignited instantly. The vehicle burned where it sat, sealing the southwestern exit. The column was boxed, lead vehicle burning, tail vehicle burning, 1.2 kilometers of forest road with no exit. Russian training doctrine dictates an immediate response to ambush. Dismount, establish a base of fire, and maneuver against the ambush line. The infantry inside the BMPs began doing exactly that. Rear hatches dropped open. Soldiers poured out into the pre-dawn darkness, seeking cover in the undergrowth on either side of the road. They ran directly into the minefields. The first mine detonated at 5:40 a.m., then another, then 3 more in rapid succession. Soldiers who had sprinted toward the tree line, the most natural cover available, triggered anti-personnel mines that the engineering platoon had placed exactly where instinct would drive them. Screaming, confusion. The forest filled with smoke and the sharp crack of mine detonations. The mortar teams opened fire at 5:41 a.m. Pre-registered coordinates meant no adjustment was needed. The first salvo landed directly on the road surface between the 3rd and 4th vehicles. High explosive fragmentation rounds sent shrapnel tearing through dismounted infantry caught in the open. The mortar fire walked methodically along the road. Each fire mission corresponded to a numbered reference point. The crews worked with mechanical precision. Load, fire, adjust to next reference, repeat. Within 90 seconds, mortar rounds had impacted across 6 separate reference points spanning the entire engagement zone. Russian soldiers who had survived the initial mine detonations and mortar strikes were now caught in the worst possible position, exposed on an open road, flanked by minefields, under indirect fire, with their vehicles burning. At 5:43 a.m., the FPV drone teams launched. 25 kamikaze drones lifted from the concealed staging area 800 meters to the east. The drone operators had thermal feeds showing the exact positions of dismounted Russian infantry. Each drone climbed above the canopy, oriented on its target, and dove. The first wave, 8 drones, targeted clusters of infantry who had gathered behind the 2 T-80 BVM tanks, using the massive vehicles as cover from the mortar fire. The soldiers believed the tanks' armor would shield them. The drones came from above. The first FPV drone struck a group of 6 soldiers crouched behind the lead T-80 BVM's hull. The modified RPG warhead detonated on impact. The fragmentation effect in the confined space between the tank hull and the road surface was devastating. A second drone struck another cluster 3 meters away, catching soldiers who had turned to run. How many armored vehicles did Ukraine destroy in this ambush? A, 3, B, 5, C, 7. The answer is at the end of this breakdown. The T-80 BVM crews attempted to respond. The lead tank's turret traversed, the gunner searching for targets, but there was nothing to engage. The Ukrainian fire teams were concealed in prepared positions under camouflage netting. The drones were too small and too fast to track with the tank's main optics. The mortar teams were over a kilometer away, invisible behind the terrain. The T-80 BVM's commander made a fatal decision. Rather than buttoning up and attempting to reverse, he ordered the driver to push forward, trying to ram past the burning lead BMP-3. The 60-ton tank lurched forward, its tracks churning mud and debris. A third Stugna-P missile was already in flight. This shot came from the flank, a firing position that the ATGM team had selected specifically for the T-80 BVMs. The missile struck the T-80 BVM's left side hull, below the turret, in the gap between the road wheels, where the side armor is thinnest. The tandem warhead defeated the side-mounted reactive armor blocks and penetrated into the fighting compartment. The T-80 BVM's autoloader ammunition carousel detonated. The catastrophic kill was instantaneous. The turret launched skyward in a column of fire, the signature jack-in-the-box effect that had become synonymous with Russian tank losses throughout the war. The carousel's propellant charges and high-explosive rounds cooked off in a chain reaction that split the hull open from the inside. 5 minutes into the ambush, 3 vehicles destroyed, scores of infantry casualties. The remaining BMP-3s attempted to maneuver. One driver tried to leave the road entirely, steering into the undergrowth. The vehicle made it approximately 15 meters before its tracks tangled in fallen timber, and it ground to a halt. Dismounted infantry near the vehicle scattered as a 4th FPV drone dove from above and struck the BMP-3's open rear hatch. The warhead detonated inside the troop compartment. Another BMP-3 reversed hard, crashing into the vehicle behind it. Both became immobilized in a confused tangle of steel on the narrow road. A mortar round struck the road surface 2 meters from the jammed vehicles, showering both with fragmentation. The crews bailed out, joining the growing mass of wounded and disoriented infantry stumbling through the smoke. Subscribe to UkraineSignal if you want to understand how modern warfare actually works, because this ambush is a masterclass in why preparation defeats improvisation, every single time. At 5:47 a.m., 8 minutes into the ambush, the surviving Russian officers attempted to organize a counterattack. Intercepted radio traffic captured a company commander screaming for his platoon leaders to establish a base of fire toward the east, where he had correctly identified the general direction of the drone launches. The transmission was fragmentary, garbled, panicked. It was also the last coherent Russian communication from the engagement zone. Ukrainian electronic warfare units, positioned 3 kilometers north of the ambush site, had been monitoring Russian radio frequencies since the column departed its assembly area. At 5:48 a.m., the EW team activated their jammers, targeting the primary and alternate frequencies used by the 810th Naval Infantry Brigade's tactical communications net. The effect was immediate and devastating. Russian soldiers who keyed their radios heard nothing but static. Platoon leaders could not reach the company commander. The company commander could not reach battalion headquarters. Battalion headquarters could not reach the column at all. Intercepted Russian traffic from the battalion command post, operating on a different frequency band that was being monitored but not jammed, revealed the growing panic at higher echelons. A battalion staff officer was recorded asking repeatedly for a status update from the column. No response came. He then requested artillery fire support on suspected Ukrainian positions, providing approximate grid coordinates. The artillery request was acknowledged by a Russian battery commander, but the fire mission was never executed. Without communication with the ground element, the battery commander could not confirm friendly positions within the forest. Firing blind into a 1.2-kilometer engagement zone where his own troops were scattered would guarantee fratricide. Russian artillery support, the one weapon system that might have disrupted the ambush, never came. The 3rd Assault Brigade had planned for this. The electronic warfare component was not an afterthought. It was integral to the ambush design from the first hour of planning. Cut communications. Isolate the target. Prevent reinforcement and fire support. Classic ambush doctrine executed with 21st century technology. At 5:51 a.m., the second wave of FPV drones launched. 12 more kamikaze drones rose from the staging area. The drone operators now had a comprehensive picture of the engagement zone from their surveillance feeds. They could see individual soldiers crawling through the undergrowth, trying to find paths through the minefields. They could see wounded men dragging themselves along the road. They could see small groups attempting to form defensive clusters behind burning vehicles. The drones struck with surgical precision. One operator threaded his drone between the trunks of 2 pine trees to strike a group of 3 soldiers who had taken cover in a shallow depression 20 meters from the road. Another operator targeted the 2nd T-80 BVM, which had been sitting stationary with its hatches sealed since the ambush began. The drone struck the tank's engine deck, the weakest point on any armored vehicle's top profile. The T-80 BVM's engine caught fire. The crew abandoned the vehicle through the driver's hatch, stumbling into smoke and chaos. That was the 5th armored vehicle rendered combat ineffective. 5 out of 8. By 5:55 a.m., organized resistance had ceased. The 810th Naval Infantry's column no longer existed as a coherent fighting force. Individual soldiers and small groups were scattered across the engagement zone, many wounded, all disoriented, cut off from communication with each other and with higher command. If you believe tactics win wars, not just equipment, type UkraineSignal in the comments. Some Russian soldiers made the decision to retreat on foot. They moved southwest, away from the direction of the drone launches, deeper into the forest. It was a logical decision. The forest offered concealment. Distance offered safety. If they could break contact and reach friendly lines, they might survive. They did not know about the second mine belt. The 3rd Assault Brigade's engineers had anticipated exactly this scenario. Soldiers fleeing an ambush on a forest road will naturally move away from the source of fire, parallel to the road, toward the nearest tree line that offers concealment. The engineers had placed a secondary belt of anti-personnel mines along the most likely withdrawal routes, approximately 150 to 200 meters from the road on the southwestern side. The first retreating soldiers reached the secondary mine belt at approximately 6 a.m. The detonations echoed through the forest. Survivors who stopped and reversed direction found themselves caught between the mine tree line behind them and the still active engagement zone ahead. The ambush had become a cage. At 6:01 a.m., 22 minutes after the first Stugna-P missile fired, the 3rd Assault Brigade's ambush commander assessed the engagement zone as neutralized. All 5 destroyed or disabled armored vehicles were burning or abandoned. No organized enemy movement was detected. Mortar ammunition expenditure had reached planned limits. Drone stocks were depleted. All 25 FPV drones had been launched and expended. The commander ordered withdrawal. This is a detail that separates professional military operations from reckless engagements. The 3rd Assault Brigade did not linger to count bodies. They did not press forward to seize disabled vehicles. They did not pursue fleeing Russian soldiers into the forest. They withdrew. Every fire team moved to pre-planned secondary positions along routes that had been rehearsed the previous night. Stugna-P teams collapsed their launchers and moved within 4 minutes of the withdrawal order. Mortar crews displaced to alternate sites. The drone teams packed their equipment and moved on foot through the forest to a rally point 1.5 kilometers east. By 6:18 a.m., the entire Ukrainian ambush force had vacated the engagement zone. Not a single element remained in position. At 6:34 a.m., Russian artillery finally fired. Having received no communication from the column for nearly 50 minutes, and with the EW jamming now lifted, the Ukrainian jammers had relocated with the withdrawal, the Russian battalion commander authorized a fire mission on the suspected ambush line. 152mm shells from a Russian 2S-19 MSTAS self-propelled howitzer battery slammed into the positions the Ukrainian fire teams had occupied 30 minutes earlier. The shells hit empty forest. Every round struck vacant ground, trees splintered, earth cratered. But the 3rd Assault Brigade soldiers were long gone, moving through secondary positions toward their defensive lines. The aftermath was documented by Ukrainian reconnaissance drones that returned to the engagement zone 6 hours later, once Russian recovery operations had been confirmed as absent. The footage, portions of which were later released through Ukrainian military channels, showed a kilometer-long trail of destruction. 5 armored vehicles destroyed or burned beyond recovery. The lead, BMP-3, turret torn away, hull blackened. The tail BMP-3 reduced to a smoldering chassis. The first T-80 BVM, its turret lying inverted 30 meters from the hull, the classic signature of an ammunition cook-off. The second T-80 BVM, engine deck gutted by fire, hatches open, abandoned. A fourth BMP-3 gutted by an internal drone strike through the rear hatch. The 3 remaining BMP-3s had sustained varying degrees of damage from mortar fragmentation and small arms fire. At least one appeared to have been driven away during the chaos. Its tracks were visible, leaving the engagement zone to the northeast, though it is unclear whether it reached Russian lines in operational condition. Ukrainian General Staff reports released on March 11th stated that the ambush inflicted approximately 130 casualties on Russian forces, a combination of killed and wounded. OSINT analysts reviewing available drone footage and satellite imagery assessed this figure as credible, noting the density of infantry in the engagement zone and the layered nature of the ambush's kill mechanisms. The material losses were significant. 5 armored vehicles confirmed destroyed represents a substantial blow to any battalion-sized formation. A BMP-3 infantry fighting vehicle has an estimated replacement cost of approximately $3 million. A T-80 BVM main battle tank costs roughly $4 to $5 million. The total equipment losses from this single ambush exceeded $18 million in armored vehicles alone, not counting personal weapons, communications equipment, night vision devices, and other material abandoned in the engagement zone. What would NATO have done differently if they were planning the defense of this sector? Drop your tactical analysis in the comments below. Against these Russian losses, the 3rd Assault Brigade reported 3 personnel lightly wounded, all from tree splinters caused by mortar fragmentation during the initial minutes of the engagement. No Ukrainian soldiers were killed. No Ukrainian equipment was lost. 3 lightly wounded, against 130 Russian casualties and 5 destroyed armored vehicles. The exchange ratio is almost incomprehensible, but it is the direct result of planning, intelligence, and disciplined execution. Let's break down why this ambush succeeded so completely and what it tells us about the evolution of defensive doctrine in the Kursk salient. First, intelligence. The entire operation was built on a signals intelligence intercept obtained 14 hours before the Russian advance. This intercept gave the 3rd Assault Brigade something that military planners dream of: certainty about enemy intentions, timing, and route. Without this intercept, the ambush would not have been possible in this form. UkraineSignal capabilities, enhanced by Western-provided electronic intelligence systems and training, have become one of the most decisive asymmetric advantages in this war. Second, terrain selection. The 1.2-kilometer engagement zone was chosen with precision. The natural choke points at both ends, the narrow road flanked by dense undergrowth, the predictable dismount patterns, every feature of the terrain was weaponized. The forest that Russian command believed would shield their movement instead became the walls of a trap. Third, combined arms integration. This ambush was not a single weapon system engagement. It layered anti-tank missiles, mines, mortars, FPV drones, and electronic warfare into a synchronized kill chain. Each system covered the gaps left by the others. TGMs destroyed the lead and rear vehicles. Mines caught dismounting infantry. Mortars suppressed the road. Drones hunted survivors. Electronic warfare prevented communication and artillery support. No single countermeasure could have defeated this layered approach. Fourth, timing and discipline. The ambush did not trigger until the entire column was inside the kill zone. This required extraordinary fire discipline from every Ukrainian soldier in position. Any premature engagement, a nervous trigger finger, an accidental mine detonation, a drone launched too early, would have compromised the entire operation. The 3rd Assault Brigade's training and experience made this discipline possible. Fifth, planned withdrawal. The ambush force did not become decisively engaged. They executed their fire plan, inflicted maximum damage, and withdrew before Russian artillery could respond. This is the hallmark of professional light infantry operations: the ability to strike and vanish, leaving the enemy to absorb punishment without a target to retaliate against. The Russian failures were equally instructive. The 810th Naval Infantry Brigade's communications security was catastrophic. The movement order that was intercepted should have been transmitted through encrypted channels with strict emissions control. Instead, it was broadcast on frequencies that UkraineSignal was actively monitoring. This single failure negated every tactical advantage the Russian plan might have offered. Russian reconnaissance was absent. No advance party scouted the route. No drones surveyed the engagement zone before the column entered. The battalion moved blind through contested terrain, trusting in the forest canopy for concealment rather than verifying the route was clear. Russian command and control collapsed within minutes. Once the EW jamming activated, the column was cut off from support. The inability to call for artillery, the single most important Russian battlefield capability, rendered the entire formation defenseless against a prepared ambush. And the fundamental Russian miscalculation, believing that mass could substitute for intelligence. 200 men and 8 armored vehicles is a significant force, but mass without information is just a larger target. Ukrainian General Staff cited this engagement on March 14th as a textbook example of what they termed adapted defensive ambush doctrine: the integration of traditional ambush principles with modern surveillance, drone warfare, and electronic warfare capabilities. The briefing specifically noted the role of FPV drones as a force multiplier, emphasizing that 25 drones costing approximately $12,500 total had contributed to the destruction of armored vehicles worth millions and the neutralization of a battalion-strength infantry force. The 3rd Assault Brigade's action near Sudzha reflects a broader evolution in Ukrainian defensive doctrine across the Kursk salient. As Russian forces continue to attempt large-scale mechanized operations to reduce the salient, Ukrainian units have refined their ability to identify, isolate, and destroy Russian formations, using layered ambush techniques that combine legacy weapon systems with cutting-edge drone and electronic warfare technology. Ukraine does not just use weapons. Ukraine invents new ways to fight. Now, the answer to the question I asked earlier: how many armored vehicles did Ukraine destroy in this ambush? The answer is B, 5. 2 T-80 BVM main battle tanks and 3 BMP-3 infantry fighting vehicles were confirmed destroyed or burned beyond recovery. A possible 6th vehicle, a BMP-3 that fled the engagement zone, may have sustained significant damage, but its final status remains unconfirmed by available open-source evidence. 3 questions remain. Was the 3rd Assault Brigade's decision to withdraw at the 22-minute mark the right call? Or could they have inflicted even greater losses by holding position longer? Could the 810th Naval Infantry Brigade have prevented this disaster if they had conducted even basic route reconnaissance with their own drones before committing 200 men to a forest road? And what would you have done differently, as either the Ukrainian ambush commander or the Russian battalion commander? Knowing what we know now, drop your analysis in the comments. Real tactics, real consequences. UkraineSignal. Subscribe to UkraineSignal. Because we break down the battles that textbooks will study for decades. The forest southwest of Sudzha is quiet now. The craters have filled with rainwater. The burned-out hulls of 2 T-80 BVM tanks and 3 BMP-3s sit where they died, slowly rusting under the pine canopy. Saplings are already growing through the shattered road surface. Nature is reclaiming the kill zone, but the wrecks remain. Silent reminders that modern warfare punishes tactical mistakes without mercy, that preparation defeats improvisation, that intelligence defeats mass, and that a forest road in the hands of soldiers who know how to fight can become the most dangerous place on Earth. Stay vigilant.